The funeral had been beautiful in its alien solemnity. Captain Joran Tall's body, wrapped in the traditional silver shrouds of his people, had been launched into the binary stars of the Valkyrie home system while hundreds of mourners sang the ancient death songs. Ben Lorne had stood at the back of the ceremony, feeling out of place among the tall, elegant Valkyrie with their pale purple skin and elaborate ceremonial robes. Now, 3 days later, he sat in the imposing chambers of the Valkyrie High Tribunal, still unsure why he'd been summoned. The 5 judges sat on their elevated platform, their dark curly hair adorned with the traditional gold circlets of their office. Elder Cavith, the tribunal's speaker, regarded Ben with solemn amber eyes. Benjamin Lorne of Earth, Elder Cavith's voice resonated through the crystalline chamber, "You have been called here to receive the final testament of Captain Joran Tall." Ben shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He'd expected maybe a personal item, perhaps one of Joran's prized engineering tools. They'd worked together for 5 years on various diplomatic missions, and despite their different species, they'd become close friends. The captain left specific instructions, Elder Cavith continued, invoking the ancient law of inherited trust. By Valkyrie tradition, you are now heir to all that was his. Ben's eyebrows shot up. I'm sorry, what? That's very generous, but I couldn't possibly. This includes, the elder interrupted, his bonded wife, Soraya. The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Ben's mouth fell open as a side door opened and a woman entered the chamber. She was breathtaking, tall and graceful, with the characteristic pale purple skin of her people, but her dark curly hair fell freely around her shoulders rather than being bound in the traditional styles. Her large, expressive eyes were the deep violet of Valkyrie nobility, and they were fixed on Ben with a mixture of shock and something that might have been resignation. "This is impossible," Ben stammered, rising to his feet. "You can't just inherit a person. It is our way," Elder Cavith said firmly. "On Valkyrie worlds, the bondmaid is not merely a spouse. They are a legacy keeper, bound to preserve the honor and holdings of their bonded until natural death or formal release. Unless you accept this responsibility, Soraya's status, and Joran's entire legacy, will be forfeit to the state." Soraya spoke for the first time, her voice melodious but strained. "I was not consulted about this arrangement." Her accent carried the musical quality of her people, but there was steel beneath the beauty. Ben looked between her and the tribunal, his mind reeling. "This is insane. I can't just, we barely know each other." "Nevertheless," Elder Cavith continued, "the law is clear. Captain Tall trusted you above all others, human. He believed you would honor both his memory and his bonded one. Will you accept this inheritance?" Ben caught Soraya's eyes across the chamber. In them, he saw fear, pride, and a desperate hope. She was trapped by her own people's traditions, and somehow, he was her only way out, or deeper into an impossible situation. "If I refuse? Then everything Joran worked for dies with him," Soraya said quietly. "His research, his diplomatic work, his family's estate, all of it." She lifted her chin proudly. "And I would be cast out, marked as one whose bonded found her unworthy of trust." Ben closed his eyes, hearing Joran's voice in his memory, "If anything happens to me, Ben, promise me you'll look after what matters most." He'd thought Joran meant his work, his research. Now he understood the deeper meaning. This would be purely formal. Ben asked carefully. "A legal arrangement?" Elder Cavith nodded. "The law requires acceptance of responsibility, nothing more. How you choose to honor that responsibility is between you and the legacy keeper." Ben looked at Soraya again. She was beautiful, intelligent, and completely trapped. And somehow, through an alien twist of fate, so was he. "I accept," he said quietly. The words seemed to echo in the vast chamber, sealing both their fates. 2 weeks had passed since the tribunal, and Ben still felt like he was living someone else's life. The estate that Joran had left behind was staggering in its scope, a sprawling compound on the Valkyrie homeworld, 3 interstellar trading vessels, mining rights on 2 moons, and a charitable foundation that funded refugee settlements across 4 systems. Ben stood in what had been Joran's study, reviewing holographic displays of financial reports while Soraya worked at the opposite end of the room, her fingers dancing across a quantum keyboard as she managed correspondence with various business partners. They'd fallen into this routine, working in the same spaces but maintaining careful distance, like 2 strangers sharing an elevator. The mining operation on Kepler's Reach is requesting additional funding for expansion, Soraya said without looking up, her voice professionally neutral. Joran always approved such requests, but the profit margins suggest we should diversify instead. Ben glanced over at her. She wore a simple blue tunic that complemented her pale purple skin, her dark curls pulled back in a practical style. Over these 2 weeks, he'd come to respect her sharp intelligence and business acumen. Joran had chosen his bonded partner well. What would you recommend? Ben asked, moving closer to examine her data projections. Redirect half the expansion funds toward the agricultural cooperative on New Thesha. The refugee settlements there are becoming self-sufficient faster than projected. She gestured to a series of charts. Joran believed in investments that built communities, not just profit. As she spoke about Joran's vision, Ben caught something in her voice, a warmth that hadn't been there in the tribunal chambers. You really understood his work, he observed. For the first time since they'd begun this arrangement, Soraya met his eyes directly. We were bonded for 8 years. He shared everything with me, his dreams, his fears, his hopes for what his wealth could accomplish. Her expression softened slightly. Including his friendship with you. Ben felt heat rise in his cheeks. He mentioned me. Constantly. A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Benjamin Lorne, the brilliant human engineer who could fix anything and somehow always made Joran laugh during their longest space flights. He said you were the only person who truly understood both his work and his heart. The admission hung between them, changing something fundamental in the room's atmosphere. Ben found himself really looking at her for the first time, not as an inherited responsibility or a beautiful alien, but as a person who had loved and lost the same friend he had. I miss him, Ben said quietly. So do I. Soraya's voice was barely above a whisper. Some nights I still expect him to come through that door, complaining about some diplomatic protocol he had to endure. They worked in comfortable silence after that, but the ice between them had begun to crack. When evening came, instead of retreating to their separate wings of the house, they found themselves lingering in the kitchen. I could prepare something, Soraya offered hesitantly. Joran always said I made the best Valkyrie spice tea in 3-star systems. Ben smiled, the first genuine smile he'd given her. I'd like that. And maybe you could tell me more about those 8 years. The parts of Joran I never got to see. As Soraya prepared the tea, she began to speak about her late bonded, his terrible habit of leaving engineering components scattered throughout the house, his unexpected talent for growing exotic flowers, the way he would sing ancient Valkyrie ballads in the shower when he thought no one was listening. Ben found himself laughing for the first time since the funeral, sharing his own stories of Joran's quirks, how he always tapped his fingers in prime number sequences when he was thinking, his obsession with collecting vintage star charts, his terrible jokes that somehow always managed to defuse tense diplomatic situations. He once told me, Soraya said as they sat across from each other at the small kitchen table, that if anything ever happened to him, he hoped his closest friend would help carry on his work. At the time, I thought he meant his diplomatic missions. And now? She studied his face in the soft light. Now I think he meant something much more personal. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and uncertainty. They were no longer just 2 people bound by alien law, they were 2 people who had loved the same man and were slowly discovering they might have more in common than grief. Tomorrow, Ben said carefully, would you like to visit the refugee settlement on New Thesha together? To see Joran's work firsthand? Soraya's smile was like sunrise. I would like that very much. The refugee settlement on New Thesha was a testament to Joran's vision. What had started as emergency shelters 3 years ago had evolved into a thriving community of interconnected domes and gardens, housing families from 6 different species who had been displaced by various conflicts across the sector. Ben and Soraya walked through the settlement together, observing the children playing in mixed-species groups while their parents tended to hydroponic farms and small manufacturing operations. The settlement coordinator, an elderly Andorian named Voss, had spent the morning showing them how Joran's funding had been transformed into sustainable infrastructure. "Your bonded was a remarkable man," Voss told Soraya as they stood overlooking a thriving marketplace. "He didn't just provide money, he provided hope. He believed in our ability to build something better." Ben watched Soraya's face as she absorbed the coordinator's words. Pride and sadness warred in her expression, and without thinking, he found himself reaching out to touch her hand gently. She didn't pull away. That evening, back at the estate, they shared dinner in the formal dining room for the first time. The massive table seemed absurdly large for just the two of them, but somehow the space felt more intimate than their previous kitchen conversations. "I never knew," Ben said, setting down his fork. "I knew Joran was generous, but seeing today, the scope of what he built." "He was always thinking beyond the immediate," Soraya replied, her fingers tracing patterns on the tablecloth. "Even our bonding ceremony, he insisted on a small gathering because he wanted to donate the money that would have gone to a grand celebration to disaster relief efforts." Ben leaned forward. "That sounds like him. Practical compassion." "Yes." She looked up at him, and Ben was struck again by the depth of emotion in her violet eyes. He chose his bonded partner the same way, not for political advantage or wealth, but because he said he needed someone who understood that love wasn't about possession, but about growing together towards something greater. The words settled between them with significant weight. Ben felt his heart rate increase as he processed what she might be saying. "Soraya," he began carefully, "these past few weeks, working together, talking about Joran. I need you to know that I don't see you as property. Or as some burden I inherited. You're brilliant and kind and still legally bound to you," she finished, but her tone wasn't bitter. "The irony isn't lost on me, Ben. For 8 years, I was bonded to a man who valued my independence. Now I'm bound to his best friend, and I find myself." "Find yourself what?" She met his eyes directly. "Finding myself grateful it was you. Joran spoke of you so often that I felt I knew you before we ever met. He said you were the most honorable person he'd ever known, human or Valkyrie." Ben reached across the table, covering her hand with his. This time, she turned her palm up to meet his touch. "He told me once that you were too good for him," Ben admitted. "That he didn't understand how he'd gotten so lucky." Soraya's laugh was soft and sad. "He said the same thing about your friendship. That he didn't deserve such loyalty." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked across the expanse of the table. Outside, the Valkyrie evening was painting the sky in shades of lavender and gold. "I have a confession," Soraya said eventually. "I've been reading Joran's personal journals. The ones he kept during his missions with you." Ben's eyebrows rose. "And?" "He wrote about how you made him feel like the best version of himself. How your friendship taught him that trust could be simple and profound at the same time." She squeezed his hand gently. "He wrote that if he could choose a brother, it would be you." The emotion hit Ben like a physical force. "He never told me that. There's more." Soraya's voice was barely above a whisper. "In his final entries, he wrote that if anything happened to him, he hoped you would find in me the same friendship and trust he'd found in you. He said we were the 2 most important people in his life, and he dreamed of us taking care of each other." Ben felt tears prick at his eyes. He was matchmaking from beyond the grave. Perhaps. Soraya's smile was tremulous but real. Or perhaps he simply knew us better than we knew ourselves. When Ben stood to clear the dishes, Soraya rose too, and they found themselves standing close together in the soft dining room light. For a moment, the air between them seemed charged with possibility. "Soraya," Ben said softly, I need you to know, whatever happens between us, it will be your choice. I will never use this legal arrangement to pressure you into anything. She stepped closer, her hand coming up to rest against his chest. And I need you to know that what I'm feeling, it's not gratitude or obligation. It's something else entirely. They didn't kiss that night, but as they stood together in the quiet house that had once belonged to their mutual friend, both of them knew that something fundamental had shifted between them. 3 months had passed since Ben had accepted his inheritance, and autumn was painting the Valkyrie landscape in brilliant shades of copper and gold. The estate's gardens, which Joran had lovingly tended, were preparing for their seasonal dormancy, though Soraya had taken over their care with surprising skill. Ben found her there on a crisp morning, kneeling beside a patch of Terran roses that Joran had somehow managed to cultivate in alien soil. She wore simple work clothes, her dark curls escaping from a loose braid, and there was something achingly beautiful about the way the morning light caught the purple undertones of her skin. He grew these for me, she said without looking up as Ben approached. Said that even on Valkyrie, I should have flowers that reminded me of Earth's beauty. You've never been to Earth, Ben observed, settling down beside her on the soft ground. No, but Joran brought me holopictures. Stories. He said someday we'd visit together. Her voice carried old sadness, but not the sharp grief of those first weeks. He wanted to show me the garden where you grew up. Said your mother grew the most magnificent roses in 3 counties. Ben's breath caught. He remembered that. He remembered everything about you. Soraya finally looked at him, and Ben saw something new in her eyes, a warmth that was specifically for him, not just a reflection of their shared loss. The way you learned to speak basic Valkyrie just to surprise him on his birthday. How you stayed up for 36 hours straight to repair the ship's life support when we hit that asteroid field near Proxima. The expression on your face the first time you tasted Valkyrie chocolate. You know about the chocolate incident? Ben groaned, remembering his enthusiastic reaction to the alien delicacy. Joran said you literally moaned with pleasure and then asked if you could marry the confectioner. Soraya's laugh was like music. He found it endearing. They worked together in comfortable silence, tending to plants that had been loved by the man they'd both lost. When Soraya reached for the pruning shears at the same moment Ben did, their hands collided, and neither pulled away immediately. Ben, she said softly, her fingers intertwining with his, I need to tell you something. He turned to face her fully, struck by the seriousness in her expression. I've been thinking about what we talked about last month. About choice, and what we both want. She took a shaky breath. For the first time since the tribunal, I feel like I have a choice. Not because the law says I belong to you, but because my heart does. The words hung in the garden air like a confession and a question combined. Soraya, Ben began, but she pressed her fingers gently to his lips. Let me finish. I love Joran deeply, and I will always carry that love with me. But what I feel for you, it's different. It's not a replacement or a consolation. It's something entirely new, and it's mine to give. Ben captured her hand, pressing a soft kiss to her palm. I feel the same way. These months with you, watching how you handle everything with such grace, seeing your compassion for the refugees, your intelligence, your strength. I'm not just honoring Joran's memory anymore. I'm falling in love with you. The admission seemed to break something open between them. Soraya's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling as she leaned forward and kissed him. It was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid of moving too fast. But when Ben's arms came around her waist and she pressed closer, the kiss deepened with months of restrained longing. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Soraya rested her forehead against his. I want to be with you, she whispered. Not because I have to, but because I choose to. Are you sure? Ben asked, his voice rough with emotion. Her answer came in another kiss, this one more confident, more demanding. When her hands slipped under his shirt to trace the warm skin of his back, Ben groaned softly against her mouth. Not here, he managed to say, glancing around the garden where anyone might see them. Then take me inside, she said simply. They made their way to Ben's quarters, hands linked, both trembling slightly with anticipation and nervous energy. Once inside, with the door closed behind them, they stood looking at each other in the soft afternoon light. We don't have to do anything you're not ready for, Ben said, reaching up to cup her face gently. I'm ready, Soraya replied, her voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in her stomach. I've been ready for weeks. Their lovemaking was tender and unhurried, full of gentle exploration and whispered endearments. Ben marveled at the soft warmth of her alien skin, the way she responded to his touch with little gasps of pleasure. Soraya discovered that humans could be just as passionate and caring as any Valkyrie lover, that Ben's hands could be both strong and incredibly gentle. Afterward, they lay entwined in Ben's bed, her dark curls spread across his chest as they watched the afternoon light fade toward evening. Do you think Joran would approve? Soraya asked quietly. Ben tightened his arms around her. I think Joran would be happy that neither of us is mourning alone anymore. I love you, she said, the words coming easier the second time. I love you too, Ben replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Not as his legacy or his gift to me, but as yourself. As Soraya. Outside, the Valkyrie night was falling, but inside their shared warmth, both of them felt like they were finally coming home. 6 months later, Ben stood before the Valkyrie High Tribunal once again, but this time he wasn't alone. Soraya stood beside him, her hand linked with his, wearing the traditional ceremonial robes of her people. The silver and blue fabric complemented her skin beautifully, and the intricate braiding of her hair marked her as a woman choosing her own path. Elder Kavath regarded them both with what might have been approval. You have come to formalize your union. We have, Ben replied, his voice steady. But we also have a proposal regarding the inheritance laws. The tribunal exchanged glances. It was unusual for an off-worlder to make suggestions about Valkyrie tradition, but Ben and Soraya had spent months researching legal precedents. Speak, Elder Kavath said. Soraya stepped forward. We propose the establishment of the Joran Foundation, which would manage all inherited estates while allowing bonded partners to choose their own paths. No one should be forced into marriage by law, nor should they lose their deceased partner's legacy because they choose freedom. The captain's work was about bringing people together by choice, not obligation, Ben added. This foundation would honor that philosophy while preserving family legacies. Elder Kavath was quiet for a long moment. And you would fund this foundation? With Joran's full estate, Soraya said firmly. It's what he would have wanted, his wealth used to give others the choice we eventually found. The tribunal deliberated for nearly an hour while Ben and Soraya waited in the chamber's antechamber. Finally, they were called back in. The tribunal accepts your proposal, Elder Kavath announced. The Joran Foundation will be established, and the inheritance laws will be amended. You have shown that sometimes the old ways must evolve to preserve their true spirit. As they left the tribunal chambers, now legally married by choice rather than obligation, Ben and Soraya walked hand in hand through the Valkyrie capital. Street vendors called out greetings, children of various species played in the plaza fountains, and the afternoon sun painted everything in warm, golden light. Do you think we'll be happy? Soraya asked as they paused beside a fountain where Joran had once proposed to her, 8 years ago. I think we already are, Ben replied, pulling her close for a kiss that drew smiles from passing pedestrians. That evening, they hosted a celebration at the estate, now officially their shared home. Representatives from the refugee settlements attended, along with former colleagues of Joran's and friends they'd made during their months of working together. The gathering was exactly what Joran would have wanted, people from across the galaxy coming together in friendship and hope. Late that night, after the last guests had departed, Ben and Soraya stood on the balcony overlooking the gardens. The Terran roses were blooming again, their fragrance mixing with the alien night air. He's still with us, you know, Soraya said softly, leaning back against Ben's chest as his arms encircled her. I know, Ben replied, resting his chin on top of her head. In the foundation, in the lives we're building, in the love we found because he brought us together. Do you ever wonder what he'd say if he could see us now? Ben considered this, thinking of his friend's terrible jokes and surprising wisdom. Probably something about how it took us long enough to figure out what he'd known all along. Soraya laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet gardens. That sounds exactly like something he'd say. As they stood together under the alien stars, surrounded by the life and legacy of the friend who had brought them together, Ben and Soraya knew they had found something rare and precious, not just love, but a partnership that honored the past while building toward a future neither of them could have imagined alone. The weight of legacy had become the foundation of joy, and from loss had grown a love that was entirely their own.